In the shadowed forest, where silence was broken only by the cry of a starving infant gorilla, Isabella clung to a miracle she could not yet see. Zuberi's body was weak, his breath shallow, his grip slipping away. And yet, against the roar of helicopters and the ruthless march of hunters, something unseen was stirring. The air itself seemed to whisper hope, for though the world had abandoned them, heaven had not. For with God nothing shall be impossible. What began as a desperate escape through darkness was about to transform into a living miracle, one that would prove the power of love, courage, and forgiveness beyond anything science had ever dared to imagine. The story begins in a forest alive with both silence and song, where the air carries a weight that seems older than time itself. Beneath the towering cathedral of emerald leaves, a fragile baby gorilla trembles with fear, his tiny chest rising and falling as though each breath might be his last. Before him looms a massive silverback, a creature of such raw power that even the trees seem to bend in respect. His frame, over 400 pounds of muscle and history, glistens in the dappled sunlight. To human eyes, this moment could have been one of terror, for the patriarch's strength could end the orphan's life in a heartbeat. And yet, something miraculous unfolds. Instead of anger, instead of rejection, the giant lowers his massive hand, slow and deliberate, the size of a human chest, and gently curls his fingers around the baby's trembling form. Then, pulling him close to the deep, steady rhythm of his heartbeat, he initiates an adoption ritual so pure, so deeply emotional, that even seasoned wildlife experts would later admit they had tears streaming down their faces as they watched. This was not survival. This was not instinct. This was love. The kind of love that transcends species and rewrites the very laws of the wild. The wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearling together. And a little child will lead them. And here, in this heart-stopping embrace between a grieving infant and a mighty leader of the forest, the prophecy whispered by nature itself seemed to come alive. This was not just an animal rescue. It was a miracle caught on film, a heartwarming animal video destined to become a viral YouTube story, touching the soul of anyone who still believes in compassion. But for us to truly understand how this moment came to be, we must go back 18 months earlier, into the wild heart of Central Africa, a land where every sunrise feels like creation's first light, and every sound echoes with the memory of eternity. The morning began with shafts of golden sunlight piercing through an ocean of mist, filtering down through ancient mahogany trees that had watched over this earth for centuries. Each trunk stood like a pillar in God's great cathedral, tangled with vines that swung like emerald ropes, alive with epiphytes and humming with insects that painted the air with sound. The haunting cry of hornbills sliced through the dawn, while the playful chatter of colobus monkeys drifted in waves. Beneath it all, the deep hush of the forest spoke louder than words, reminding every soul who entered that they stood in a place where humanity's ancestors once walked. In this sacred wilderness stood a small outpost of hope, a research station built from humble, eco-friendly wood and mud, a fragile beacon in a land scarred by poaching, greed, and encroachment. It was here that Dr. Isabella Martinez, a primatologist whose life was carved by purpose, prepared for the mission that would define her very existence. She had given up a comfortable life in ivory towers of academia to kneel in the mud of forgotten jungles, to let sweat and sacrifice tell her story instead of books. Her work was not just science, it was faith. Faith that humanity could rediscover itself through the eyes of the gorillas. Faith that the human heart could beat in rhythm with the heartbeat of the forest. Ask the animals, and they will teach you. Or the birds in the sky, and they will tell you. Speak to the earth, and it will teach you. On this morning, the earth was ready to teach her a lesson so profound that her life, and the lives of countless gorillas, would never be the same. Isabella's focus had been a family of gorillas led by a patriarch whose name carried reverence across both human and animal tongues. Makumba, nearly 6 feet tall, weighing over 400 pounds, his very presence radiated a paradox. Terrifying strength wrapped in unexpected gentleness. To see him was to stand at the crossroads of fear and awe. For though his power could shatter bones, his wisdom held the tribe together in harmony. By his side was Nyota, his queen, whose sharp intelligence guided foraging routes and protected the younger females. Around them, Django and Kala, adolescent males brimming with restless energy, sparred and played, learning the laws that would one day make them leaders or exiles. And then, the jewels of the family. Asha, the curious explorer whose wonder reminded Isabella of a human child discovering the world for the first time. Bomba, the mischievous clown whose somersaults brought laughter to the forest. And Zuberi, the infant barely old enough to cling, whose tiny fingers wrapped tightly around his mother's fur. To Isabella, they were not research subjects, not data points in dusty journals. They were souls, each unique, each radiant with emotion. She had seen them grieve, celebrating births with what could only be described as joy, mourning the dead with cries that pierced the silence. She had even witnessed moments of what seemed like prayer. The gorillas staring skyward during thunderstorms as though acknowledging something greater than themselves. The Lord is good to all. He has compassion on all he has made. That verse echoed in Isabella's mind as she scribbled her notes, because in their eyes she saw not beasts, but beings. This was not just animal research. It was a dramatic wildlife rescue mission unfolding in slow motion. A touching animal story that revealed humanity itself mirrored back through the wild bond of gorilla society. But light cannot shine without shadow, and the forest's song was about to be pierced by the most dangerous sound of all. Silence. For while Isabella dedicated her life to protecting these gentle giants, a darker force was rising, one that saw not compassion, but currency. International wildlife trafficking, a billion-dollar empire of blood and betrayal. In this ruthless underworld, gorilla infants were not seen as children of the forest, but as trophies, commodities, living dolls to be traded among the wealthy who measured status in stolen lives. To snatch a baby meant first slaughtering the family that protected it, leaving behind a trail of blood on the jungle floor. Leading one of the most merciless syndicates was Victor Clough, a man whose soul had been carved hollow by greed. Once a military contractor, now a trafficker, he commanded with cold precision. Drones scanning tree lines, hidden cameras watching research stations, corrupt officials greasing the way with lies and fear. And unbeknownst to Isabella, his network had already set its gaze on the Wendy family, studying their every move with military discipline. This was not chance. This was a hunt. For the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. But I have come that they may have life, and have it to the full. As the forest breathed around her, Isabella did not yet know that her calling would not only be to study life, but to save it, through a rescue mission so daring, so soul-shattering, that it would test the very limits of her courage. What began as research was about to become survival. What began as observation was about to become a heartwarming animal video the world would never forget. A viral YouTube story where the line between human and gorilla, between animal and humanity, would blur into one unbreakable bond. The hunters had studied the gorillas as though they were reading from a book of weakness. They knew each daily rhythm, who foraged where, who slept close to the patriarch, who guarded which side of the clearing. And most devastating of all, they had identified little Zuberi, the tender infant of the family, as their ultimate prize. For in the twisted markets of greed, infant gorillas fetched sums so obscene that they were worth more than gold, more than ivory, more than the sanctity of life itself. Yet to snatch one, these traffickers had to shatter entire worlds. For a gorilla mother will never surrender her child willingly, and a silverback will die before allowing harm to touch a single hair of his family. And so, the men carried with them their arsenal of cruelty. Tranquilizer rifles tipped with toxins powerful enough to fell giants, nets woven like cages of despair, and the cold discipline of soldiers who had long forgotten what it meant to have a soul. Under cover of the mist, they advanced with military precision, their boots pressing silently into the damp forest floor as if the earth itself dared not resist them. They struck at dawn, the sacred hour when life awakens tenderly, when baby gorillas cling lazily to their mothers, when the great patriarch still hums his morning chest beat of protection. The first dart flew like a shadow through the fog and embedded itself into Makumba's thick shoulder. His roar shattered the silence, a sound that shook the canopy. But his strength, unmatched by any man, began to wither as the poison coursed through his veins. Nyota, fierce and unyielding, rushed forward with cries of warning that echoed like thunder, until a second dart silenced her, and she crumpled beside her fallen mate. One by one the mighty fell, their roars turning to groans, their arms heavy with betrayal. Zuberi, too small to understand, clung desperately to his mother's unmoving chest, crying with the pure voice of innocence that pierced every leaf, every bird, every heart that still had the courage to feel. Defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. But the men did not defend. They destroyed. They tore him from his mother's arms and shoved him into a reinforced cage, a mechanical coffin that rattled with the sound of desperation. His tiny hands reached out through the cold steel bars, trying to grasp the air where his family lay motionless. And it was in this unbearable moment, this scene that no heart could watch without breaking, that Isabella arrived. She froze at the edge of the clearing, her breath caught between horror and fury, as her beloved family lay fallen, and her most cherished infant cried for a rescue only she could attempt. In that instant she knew. This was no longer about research, no longer about observation. This was about salvation. This was about risking everything. Her life, her career, her very soul, to answer the cry of one helpless creature. The chase that followed was not a story of scientists versus poachers. It was a story of faith against despair, love against greed, the beating of one woman's heart against the marching boots of an empire of cruelty. Isabella had nothing but her knowledge of the land and the unbreakable determination forged from years of living side by side with guerrillas. Clove's men had everything: weapons, helicopters, drones, night vision, and the arrogance of criminals who thought themselves invincible. Yet they lacked the one thing that gave Isabella strength: love. She followed them through the maze of the rainforest, her boots sinking in mud, her breath ragged but steady, every step marked by broken branches and the faint sound of Zuberi's cries. Those cries, sharp, haunting, heartbreaking, guided her through the darkness like a lantern burning in her soul. For 3 days and nights she shadowed them, surviving on nothing but stream water, dried rations, and faith. The jungle tested her. Leeches clung to her skin. Storms drenched her. Sleep threatened to steal her vigilance. But still she pressed on, never letting the sound of Zuberi's voice fade from her pursuit. Each night, as the traffickers made camp, she crouched in the shadows, listening to his sobs carried through the canopy, each sob renewing her vow: rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Psalm 82:4. On the third night, Providence opened a door. Clove's men, drunk with arrogance and literal alcohol, relaxed their guard, posting only a single watchman as they laughed and celebrated their anticipated fortune. Isabella's heart pounded like a drum as she slipped closer, imitating the calls of hornbills and distant primates to draw the guard away. Every sound she made carried with it both science and prayer. She moved toward the cage, her hands trembling as she reached for the bars. Zuberi recognized her instantly. His panicked cries softened into whimpers, then into a fragile coo of hope, as if even in his young soul he understood. Salvation had arrived. When her hands closed around him, when she pulled him from that steel prison and pressed him to her chest. The bond between human and animal, between researcher and subject, became something eternal. This was no longer Isabella and Zuberi. This was mother and child. Yet their rescue was only the beginning. For the moment Clove's men discovered the empty cage, the jungle erupted into chaos. The hunt began, and this time Isabella was not simply following. She was being pursued. The forest, once her ally, now became a battlefield. Every rustle could be a pursuer. Every cry of a bird could mask the crack of a rifle. She moved through the undergrowth with Zuberi clinging to her chest, his little hands gripping her shirt so tightly that his nails dug into her skin, leaving tiny crescents of pain that reminded her she was alive, that he was alive, and that every second mattered. He weighed almost 30 pounds, a burden to any human. Yet she carried him as though he were weightless, for the love of a mother knows no measure. His whimpers, though heartbreaking, betrayed them. Each cry carried across the jungle, drawing their hunters closer. She heard drones buzzing overhead, scanning with thermal eyes that pierced even the densest canopy. She saw shadows moving on ridges, guns glinting in the pale moonlight. Yet still she pressed on, guided not by sight but by faith in the forest she had come to know better than her own reflection. She led them through streams to mask their scent, hid in hollow trees when the patrols drew near, and whispered prayers into Zuberi's fur when exhaustion threatened to consume her. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And she believed it. For 3 endless nights, she endured this living nightmare, the forest echoing with shouts and radios, with the relentless footsteps of men who sought to drag them both into darkness. But within, Isabella burned something no weapon could extinguish. The love that exists when humanity chooses to defend the voiceless. And it was this love, this unyielding bond, that would turn the tide. Separated from his mother's milk, torn from the gentle rhythm of her heartbeat, and thrust into a nightmare of fear and pursuit, little Zuberi was unraveling before Isabella's eyes. Each whimper cut deeper than any wound, each shallow breath a terrifying reminder that trauma leaves scars too deep for even the strongest hands to heal alone. For Isabella, every moment became a choice between 2 equally cruel realities. To stop and feed him meant risking discovery by men who hunted them like shadows. To keep running meant denying his fragile body the comfort he so desperately craved. Her heart broke with every step, because no matter what decision she made, the weight of failure pressed against her soul. And yet, in the darkest hours of the forest, she remembered the verse, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Even as the jungle closed in with danger seen and unseen, Isabella carried both hope and despair in her arms, refusing to surrender while Zuberi's life still clung to her trembling hands. By the 3rd day, her strength was nearly gone. 3 days of sleepless nights, of scaling steep terrain with trembling legs and blistered feet, of forcing her body beyond every known limit, had stripped her of everything except raw determination. Zuberi had stopped eating. His bright, playful eyes, once alive with curiosity, had dulled into a lifeless stare, his tiny fingers loosening their grip on Isabella's shirt. He was slipping away, and she knew it. His shallow breaths were like fading whispers, each one weaker than the last. Her mind screamed that she might be holding him in his final hours, that her sacrifice had not been enough. Meanwhile, the criminals tightened their net with relentless precision. Klov's mercenaries unleashed tracking dogs whose howls shattered the silence, and helicopters circled above with thermal scanners that stripped the forest of its secrecy. The sound of rotor blades grew louder, closer, like vultures circling overhead. Isabella's vision blurred from dehydration. Her body quaked with exhaustion, but still she stumbled forward, clinging to the thin thread of faith that somewhere, somehow deliverance was waiting. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you." The cruelest blow came at sunset, when Zuberi stopped responding to her voice entirely. His body lay motionless against her chest, his breathing ragged and faint. Isabella pressed her face against his fur and wept silently, because she knew the truth. She was watching the child she had sworn to protect slip into death's shadow. And yet, even in that despair, she whispered words of life over him, begging the heavens not to let this innocent soul be taken. Trapped on a rocky outcropping with nowhere left to run, surrounded by the glow of searchlights and the growl of engines, she prepared herself for the unbearable, that their story might end not with triumph, but with tragedy. Her heart whispered one last prayer. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." But miracles often arrive in the final breath of hope. Out of the night sky, thunder rolled, not from a storm, but from the roar of military helicopters. Interpol and anti-poaching units swept in like avenging angels, striking Kozlov's empire with ruthless precision. In the chaos, Isabella staggered toward the extraction point, clutching Zuberi's limp body to her chest. There, under the beating blades of salvation, Dr. James Okafor knelt with trembling hands and emergency medical gear. Intravenous fluids flowed into Zuberi's tiny veins. Oxygen kissed his struggling lungs, and Isabella never let go of his hand, whispering to him as if her love alone could will him back. Against all odds, the infant's breaths deepened. His small chest rose with strength again. The miracle had begun. Yet the greatest question remained. Could Zuberi ever return to the wild? Human care had saved him, but it also carried the danger of alien scent and broken instincts. Would his gorilla family, scarred by their own trauma, welcome him back, or reject him forever? Isabella's heart trembled as she carried him into the heart of his territory, knowing this reunion might end in heartbreak. But what unfolded next would redefine everything humans thought they knew about gorilla hearts. The silverback Macumba, towering and solemn, approached with deliberate steps. His massive frame could have crushed the infant in an instant. Scientists had warned Isabella that the patriarch might reject Zuberi as tainted by human touch. But then, with a gentleness that defied his strength, Macumba extended his enormous hand and touched the infant's face. A gesture so human, so tender, that it left Isabella breathless. Recognition lit the silverback's eyes. Zuberi was not a stranger. He was a son returned. Nyota, the grieving mother who had sunk into despair since her infant's disappearance, rushed forward with desperate urgency. She pressed Zuberi to her chest, inspecting every inch of him, and then began the grooming ritual that restored his scent and his place within the family. One by one, the Bindi clan approached, touching him, welcoming him, celebrating his return. The jungle echoed not with cries of mourning, but with sounds of joy. It was a reunion so powerful it rewrote science itself. Proof that forgiveness, memory, and unconditional love dwell deeply in the animal kingdom. Isabella, watching with tears streaming down her face, understood then what her ordeal truly meant. This was not just a rescue. It was a revelation, a reminder that the bonds of love are stronger than fear, that compassion can overcome even the deepest wounds, and that family, whether human or gorilla, is the universal language of life. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. And so, Zuberi's story became more than a survival tale. It became a living testimony that healing is possible, even after the deepest trauma. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to keep fighting when every step feels impossible. That forgiveness, as shown by Macumba, transcends instinct and speaks to the very soul of creation. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not found in victory over enemies, but in the gentle return of a lost child to loving arms. And so, what began as a nightmare in the jungle ended as a miracle that no words could fully capture. Against bullets, hunger, exhaustion, and fear, love had carried Zuberi back into the arms that once cradled him. Macumba's gentle touch, Nyota's tearful embrace, and the family's overwhelming welcome proved that bonds torn apart by cruelty could be healed by compassion. Isabella stood silently, tears streaming down her face, knowing she had witnessed something far greater than research or science. She had seen forgiveness made flesh, and hope reborn in the eyes of a child who had almost been lost forever. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. As Zuberi nestled once more against his mother's chest, safe and loved, the forest seemed to breathe again. Isabella realized this was not just the rescue of one infant gorilla. It was a message for all humanity, that no matter how broken, how lost, or how wounded, love always finds a way home. And in that sacred reunion between a mother and her child, the world was reminded of its greatest truth. Miracles are real, and they live where love refuses to surrender.